The News Gang is here, and tonight Jubilee versus Jubilee in Kiambaa and Muguga. Which Jubilee will carry the day? We are live from the Tallying Center and lots of analysis here. Also on the show, which way wheelbarrow? Testing time for Ruto's vehicle of choice for State House. Plus, the umpteenth funeral of NASA. NASA never dies. And the endless obituaries. Who is next? On the kicker tonight, lessons from the Zuma mayhem. Jamila's memo cries out for the Kenyan parent. Yvonne takes on the end of COVID-19, or is it? Well, on the angle tonight, the power to read and pay for it with an arm and a leg. All right, we have Wilson Mushore tonight. He's a guest gangster on the other side doing our sign language interpretation. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't go anywhere else. We have to go to Kiambaa. It's been such a day. We've seen quite some drama. Right now, the UDA candidate, Francis Njuguna Wanjiku.
John, actually.
Yes. John, yeah?
John.
Oh, and it's... Okay.
John?
John
Njuguna Wanjiku.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you know, I thought for a moment I said Jane, but anyway. so John Njuguna Wanjiku and Kariri Njama in a tight race, quite frankly. But as it is now, the UDA candidate seems to have taken an early lead there. Francis, walk us through this. I mean, I remember one of the interesting things that you told me as this was starting was that UDA looked popular in the place, but the candidate wasn't very well known. The Jubilee candidate was very well known. Jubilee was having challenges for all the things that are going on there. So it was always going to be an interesting race.
And the numbers can tell you. You have both candidates with about 7,000 votes out of the results that have streamed in from about 58 polling stations or thereabout, out of 154. And you can see it's quite a tight race. This is basically what every so often you hear, every vote counts. And literally every vote is counting there. We've seen all manner of results coming from both camps. Actually, when you speak to the UDA team, they tell you they have won it. When you speak to the Jubilee team, they say they have won it. Interestingly, both teams had agents in all the polling stations. And so you would expect that their agents were sending their results to maybe their parallel tallying center for the respective teams. So each team is claiming victory in Kiambaa. Each team is claiming victory in Muguga. But what is important is to look at the results that are coming from IEBC. And here you see a gap of about 800 votes or thereabout, quite significant, bearing in mind that it is a by-election.
Yeah.
The challenge is in maintaining that lead. And bearing in mind that also this is a constituency that has 98,000 registered voters in 154 polling stations. So once you get maybe to about 100 polling stations mark, the race is now clearly defined. For now, let's continue looking at the numbers as they stream in, because the IEBC numbers ndio kusema.
Yeah, Linus, people claiming victory left, right, and center in such elections we've seen before, it's almost as if claiming victory is just as important as the victory itself.
Absolutely, and especially for a race that has been propped up as a massive showdown. You started off by saying Jubilee versus Jubilee. It can be expanded to other areas. Remember, this is Tanga versus Kieleweke, and then remember, more consequentially, this is Jubilee versus UDA, and then, more frankly, Uhuru Kenyatta versus William Ruto. So this is a huge night for both of them. That is the president and the deputy president. And I agree with Francis. In a by-election, a difference of 800 votes is...
It's not comforting.
It's not comfortable at all. Yeah. It's not comfortable, especially when the difference is against you. So for President Uhuru Kenyatta, if these numbers hold tonight, then the president is actually staring at a nightmare in his nearest screen. For William Ruto and his hustler supporters, if the numbers stay the way they are for the night, I don't know. I would go for that line that football commentators like using. Do not adjust your sets. And it's not even midnight yet. It's looking good for UDA. If they can keep the difference of 800 votes or even 500, and considering this is a by-election, then they're in for a big night and a shocker.
I know we're only recording or reporting, getting reports from 58 out of the 154, polling centers across this constituency, polling stations across this constituency. But either way, even if Jubilee were to beat UDA by a small margin, the fact that UDA would have been able to garner such a high number of votes and be neck and neck with Jubilee still does say something, and is still, taking the battle to Jubilee's stronghold and saying, we are here and we are contenders. So this is really Jubilee's race to lose, and this will be a tough one for them either way. They win by a small margin, it still says something about the fact that UDA has made these inroads into what is typically Jubilee's territory, when for all intents and purposes these two were, the same party, not too long ago. Of course, if UDA beats Jubilee, then, that just adds to the significant string of losses that we have seen Jubilee suffer in recent by-elections, both at ward level and at constituency level. Would be interesting to see, I think for me, I would be interested to see what would the comparison be between Kiambaa constituency and Juja constituency. Remember, in Juja, the Jubilee party was beaten hands down. I think, was it the PEP candidate getting, I think, a little more than twice the number of votes the Jubilee candidate got. So I think, for me, this would be an interesting night for UDA, whichever way it goes.
And Joe, I think what we're seeing in this by-election is, I think, what we see across the country during by-elections in terms of voter turnout. I think so far it's slightly over 15%. The chairman of IABC had spoken earlier in the day, said at that point they were looking at about 20% of registered voters, who are about slightly over 96,000 in that
95,000.
Yes, in that constituency. But you talk about if this trend continues and what it means for UDA winning in the president's backyard, if that is how the trend continues. And then looking at how much resources was put into campaigns into Kiambaa, the political bigwigs that we saw there, led by Majority Leader Amos Kimunya, until today we're seeing him there being harassed a bit by voters. So wakisema aende, must go. The resources, the time, the energy that was expended, and I think also to some extent the state machineries were supporting the Jubilee candidate. And if it doesn't go the Jubilee's way, this is a huge deal. We keep talking about how UDA believes that they've made inroads into central Kenya. This would be evidence that maybe it is true that UDA, claims by UDA that they've made inroads into central Kenya, will have been proven right.
And so the numbers just changed there, and
yes.
I think the margin is now about 600.
It's about 799, because it's 60 polling stations, 8,083 for the UDA candidate, 7,284 for the Jubilee candidate. That's a difference of about 799.
Now there's something else which one would say. I mean, like, we have to push this to the limit a little bit. This notion that UDA has made significant inroads and therefore it's necessarily a good thing. I think that if we are looking at using this as some kind of barometer for the next general election, then it would be a good thing, yes, but it can only be the beginning. Why do I say that? Like, in terms of the general election that we are going into, if William Ruto is going to make a significant dent to the point of winning the election, then he needs to actually do better in President Kenyatta's backyard, in the sense that there's no way that he can do like some 50-50 thing with whatever formation the president will be supporting and still hope actually to win. So this can only be a beginning point for him if he hopes to make some significant gains that then make it easier for him to win the presidency. In this central regions of the country where the president got 90-something% of the vote, he absolutely would have to get that sort of margin and then now hope to get everything that the president got the last time around. Because, I mean, if this is being used as some kind of a barometer for what might happen next year, then it's only a place to start from and build, so that his margins in that region are something way better than what we'll see. Because if this holds like this, it will still be 50-something and 40-something, which again would mean that whereas the president may have lost some grounds, but he will still be, can still be very successful in sufficiently dividing that vote in a way that then, you know, basically jeopardizes the DP's chances.
Absolutely. And the Mount Kenya region particularly, looking at how it voted in 2013 and how it voted in 2017, then one would expect that it would vote in a similar fashion if it was to favor the deputy president. Any split in the Mount Kenya votes would be injurious on his presidential bid, number one. Alternatively, if it is, if the voting patterns are fractured in the Mount Kenya region, then it would mean that he would have to get the difference in terms of what you would lose in Mount Kenya elsewhere, be it Western, be it Coast, be it Northeastern, be it Nairobi or elsewhere. But more fundamentally, it is important to look at this by-election in Kiambaa in context. Number one, this is the first proper Jubilee versus UDA contest. In previous by-elections, let's say in Juja, it was PEP, which is an affiliate
proxy, yes.
or a proxy or a sister party to UDA. If you look at Msambweni, for example, where it all started, it was an independent candidate versus the ODM candidate. Jubilee didn't have a candidate, but was seen to support the ODM candidate. In Kibra, the Jubilee candidate there, McDonald Mariga, was seen as a Deputy President William Ruto's candidate as opposed to the Jubilee candidate. And that's why you saw members of parliament from Jubilee campaigning for Imran Okoth, the ODM candidate. If you look at what happened in Kabuchai, if you look at what happened in Bonchari, if you look at what happened in Matungu, it was more of the ODM party versus the NASA, do we still say NASA or former NASA coalition in that context. So the first proper contest between Jubilee and UDA is in Kiambaa, and by extension in Muguga. Maybe a little bit of it, what we saw in London. But there were also some factors at play. But I would argue that the first proper contest is in Kiambaa. Why? Because other than a ward race that is a little tight in terms of the voters, the number of polling stations, a constituency is a proper contest because it has a series of polling stations and a sizable number of registered voters. So it would give you, a good measure of what is happening. And this tight race tells you something. One would argue, no, this is a by-election in a parliamentary race, not necessarily a presidential election. Maybe the dynamics would change in a presidential contest. But whichever outcome will be in Kiambaa, it will give Jubilee some bragging rights if they win. It will give UDA some bragging rights if they win. And more so for the deputy president, he would say he has now managed to make inroads properly in the president's backyard.
And if they win, that would be the first proper UDA member of parliament that we have.
I think, Joe, we need to look at also what UDA is doing in other parts of the country in terms of even voter registration. 5 days ago, they started voter registration exercise in Kisumu, and they're planning to have about 10,000 members registered in August. They started voter registration exercise in Rift Valley. I think to date they have over 2.8 million registered voters, as in UDA registered members, of the party. Of course, it's trying to bolster its chances in the polls. All these aspirants for governor, member of parliament, MCAs, all trying to sort of like they're rallying behind this whole exercise of trying to register members so that they can have members who can vote for them during the election. And I think to some extent, UDA seems to be imejipanga for the elections, with the registration of voters, with fielding candidates now, with what we're seeing in Kiambaa, with the campaigns that had been there. Inaonekana ni kana kwamba they're actually really already in the 2022 campaign mode, as maybe compared to their opponents who are still trying to form these alliances. We're talking about Jubilee, ODM, tutaenda vipi, washaamua na wanaendelea mbele. And maybe if this continues and maybe they win this seat, it could be as a result of that planning that they are doing. But I think for me, what also stands out in today's by-election is the fact that there was no violence, like what what we had recently witnessed in the other by-elections across the country, other than what we had seen, scuffles between Muskunya and some voters. But generally, the Muguga ward by-election and the Kiambaa by-election was peaceful. And for me, that really means a lot in terms of now how this whole exercise was conducted and hopefully going forward.
Yeah, and hopefully with the tallying process, you know, and you know, just the final vote count. Because you remember, you know, in the previous by-election, it had to be stopped for a while, you know, in the middle of the night by the IEBC chair. So that would be interesting to see. But another thing, a hallmark for me that was, you know, shows you how high stakes this was all the propaganda and the disinformation that was being spewed by both sides. If you recall, there was, you know, a series of fake alerts that came out, I think, was it yesterday?
Last night, yeah.
You know, that, and it was really a fake alert mimicking one of, you know, the 411 alert saying the Jubilee party candidate has withdrawn at this late hour. And immediately after we saw a counter from Raphael Tuju, the Jubilee party Secretary General, we saw another one from the other side, another fake alert saying the UDA party candidate had withdrawn at the last race. And that is something not particularly typical with a by-election. So that just tells you how, for both sides and their supporters, how this is, you know, a very important win. Just the attempt to try and, you know, is it voter suppression or, you know, diverting the voters' attention in such a manner for a by-election, you know, at this stage, just tells you about the race ahead and, you know, what's to come.
And Yvonne, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I think what was interesting about these two by-elections is that there were a lot more than just you know, constituency or ward by-election in the case of Muguga, because there's a sense in which they were so tied with sort of national dynamics that we've seen that I am sure at some point even the voters in those places were wondering what on earth was going on, because they suddenly see all of these people they've never seen.
Even from different counties,
exactly.
completely coming there to...
Some people they only see on TV, they finally showed up there asking them to vote, and I see that the numbers have changed a little bit, but the margin seems to be quite in the range of 700 thereabouts. So it's going to be an interesting night.
721 actually now.
Yeah,
that's the difference. And as we said earlier, a lead of about between 500 and 700 is you can call it a healthy lead in a closely contested election as this one. This is actually one of the races where the winner would easily beat the first runners up with about 300 votes. Bearing in mind that the polling stations, the law says a polling station should not have more than 700 registered voters. You've seen some polling stations with about 300, 400, 500. So how tight the race is shows you, one, the kind of campaigns that were conducted, two, the dynamics at play. There were all these stories about the older voters versus the younger voters, which was quite interesting. And number two, the areas where these results are coming from. Remember, Kiambaa constituency has 5 wards with 32 polling centers, 34 polling centers, and 154 polling stations. So one ward, if let's say it's a stronghold of one candidate, you're likely to see results upsetting the numbers as they were. And then if the results from the other candidate's stronghold come, then they will also upset the numbers as it were. It is also a question of which were the strongholds for each of the contestants. It is important to note that Kareri Njama, the Jubilee candidate, comes from Kihara ward and actually voted at Gashie Primary School. On the other hand, the UDA candidate comes from Shianda ward and voted at the Mbegwa Primary School. And some of the battlegrounds were Karuri ward, where Banana Hill is, my village. And then there's also Dendero ward, where Rwaka is. And you saw, even during the campaigns, the main candidates concentrated their road shows, their rallies in Rwaka, Banana, and Gashie. Tells you something. These are very populated areas where the bulk of the voters come from. But that is what you would say the urban vote. There's also a little rural vote in the villages, interior villages. It is also important to note that the Jubilee candidate died in 2017. And during the Jubilee nominations, gave the former MP, the late Paul Koinange, a run for his money. And necessitated a repeat nominations after what we saw, Jubilee nominations, the cancellation, and the repeat nominations. And so he had the advantage, as it were, of having vied previously compared to the UDA candidate. So you would say the UDA candidate is a new entrant in the world of politics. And for him to put up such a show, it tells you something.
Yes, Linus, Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of the Republic, right now, what ought to be going on in his mind? I mean, this is his party, which is basically disintegrated to a large extent, given what we have seen. I mean, all these MPs who are now stamping for UDA, they were some of his staunchest supporters in 2017. We saw them. And right now, we basically have a fratricide within the Jubilee party that propelled him to the presidency 2 times in very hotly contested races, both in 2013 and 2017. And right now, the party isn't anything close to what it was.
That's right, Joe. And I think where the president's mind is right now ought to be the remaining polling stations, because as at now, the UDA candidate is in the lead. And if it holds this way, it's not going to be good for him. It's going to be of very serious implications to him politically, because it will formally mark the beginning of a lame duck 12 months towards the end of his term. It'll be a very weak finish, because this will be a kick in the teeth by his deputy, with whom he has gone now into an open fight politically. He has made it very clear that he doesn't want William Ruto to be his successor as the next president of Kenya. And he's moved ahead and started working with not just the ODM leader Raila Odinga, but also the other candidates, the other rather party leaders, the likes of Kalonzo Musyoka, the likes of Musalia Mudavadi, the likes of Gideon Moi. President Uhuru Kenyatta has shown where his preferences are. And what the deputy president has done tonight is to take the battle to his backyard. This, politically speaking, Kenyan speak, is the president's bedroom. That is what was said of Kibra when Jubilee was going for the Kibra seat through McDonald Mariga. The same can be said tonight of Njuguna Wanjiku, the candidate of UDA, who is on the verge, actually, who is in the lead right now as the vote counting goes. If it ends this way, back to the question of the President Joe, it'll be a humiliating outcome for the president. And there's something else it also says. It has never happened for any sitting president that you lose a race so important and in your own backyard. So this will be quite a slap in the face of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Let me give what from history would be the equivalent. In 1966, there was a similar contest between the president, that was Jomo Kenyatta, and the deputy or vice president at the time, which is Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. The split within KANU ended up seeing the vice president, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, forming the Kenya People's Union, a party that went ahead now to challenge KANU. There was a mini election called the Little General Election that was held in June, across 2 dates in June 1966. This was after the tomboy, obviously, the draftsman of very many laws of those time, introduced a clause that said if you change allegiances of the party, then you will have to seek
a fresh mandate.
It's a fresh mandate. And so about 19 parliamentary seats were up for by-elections. One of the seats, which would be the Kiambaa equivalent tonight, was the Kandara seat, occupied by Bildad Kagia that time. Bildad Kagia was an opponent of Kenyatta right from the days of KCA to the days of KAU, Kenya African Union, and then now when it went to KANU. And so Kenyatta committed himself deeply to the defeat of Bildad Kagia in Kandara. On the eve of the election in Kandara, Jomo Kenyatta had a rally in Kandara and said, and spoke of crushing doodoo's or jiggers. That's how he referred to the Kenya People's Union, KPU, like flour. And that is what happened to Bildad Kagia. He only got 10% of the vote in that by-election. You imagine what it would have meant for Bildad Kagia to win the Kandara parliamentary seat, considering the factors at play. The factors at play were not just local, but also national. This was a contest between Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Tonight, what we have in Kiambaa is not strictly a race between Kariri Njama and Njuguna Wanjiko. This is also a contest between Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. And that is how it will play out in the end. And if Uhuru Kenyatta loses, then it will be a very humiliating one for him. And like I said, it marks the beginning proper of a lame duck 12 months to the end of his term.
Which is one hell of a long time. Huh?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add why it's more direct now, because remember it was about a month ago that the Deputy President William Ruto openly declared his support
for UDA.
So this is now firmly him in UDA and the President in Jubilee Party. It doesn't get any more clearer than that. I just wanted to add that to your point.
The party, the victory party, if it can be called that, but at least we saw earlier today, Francis, the Deputy President was actually present with a number of those MPs, Jubilee MPs, but who are allied to UDA. I don't know whether it was a tallying center or something, but basically...
The celebrations have begun.
Yeah, I mean, it was very early celebrations about what had happened in Kiambaa.
Well, it's the confidence that the team believes they had in terms of the numbers. But it's also important, Joe, to look at the numbers again.
They've tightened.
We are now at 69 out of 154 polling stations.
They've tightened quite a bit.
And it is now 9,080 for John Njuguna Wanjiko, and 8,751 for Kariri Njama. That gives you about 329 votes. So now the shift was, initially we had about 900, reduced to about 800, 700.
And then 431.
431, now it has come to about 300 and something. And this is what I alluded earlier on. For such a race, as tight as it was, every vote counts, literally, And if the difference is now 251, if Kariri Njama was to play catch-up and maybe open a lead in one or another, it will be a seesaw of sorts. One candidate, once the results come in, the numbers would keep changing, and the positions, number one and number two, will keep changing. One would wonder why we are not talking about the other 6 candidates, because from the onset, clearly this was a 2-horse race. I mean, look at Evans Gishia. He is number 3 with 30 votes.
In Kenyan political parlance, when you talk about horses, you need to talk about other animals, but we'll avoid them for tonight.
I will not talk about them, but it is important to note that 2 of the candidates at the very last, that is Kamau Willie Mbogwa with 4 votes and Mudhaka Lucy Wanjiru with 5 votes, had withdrawn in favor of the UDA candidate and the Jubilee candidate respectively. Though one would wonder what would be the significance of the numbers that they add to the 2 horses so in any case. But be it as it may, it is important to note that the rejected votes are actually more than the 6 candidates combined.
Well, I would say that because of the withdrawal, maybe some people instead now voted for the people they wanted to support. But it's an
including the rejected votes.
I think, Joe, as we see the numbers coming in now, it's 69 polling stations out of 154. These are the official ones from IEBC. But if you look at, I'm trying to look at this role of social media, fake news and propaganda. This is a by-election. But already we had on social media already numbers being declared and results being declared and even almost winners being
posting
and we sometimes get
congratulatory messages for both candidates.
Exactly. And sometimes we as the media get into trouble with the masses to some extent, because we're said to be putting maybe stale numbers. But now, of course, they need to understand that we cannot put up numbers that are not official. And this, it means that maybe it shows maybe the trend that we may have to see in 2022, because even if you compare with how things were in 2017 and now, looking at statistics, there's 85% internet penetration in Kenya now, which is almost kila mtu. And you can imagine how much propaganda, as Yvonne was talking about, where we even had screenshots of candidates. There was one I saw, and there was a tag, a news tag like the one we have in our bulletin, saying so-and-so has considered defeat, or those messages that was going around. What this means in 2022, even for us as media, in terms of sifting through what is right and what is wrong, so that we were able to project what is the correct stand. And I think that is also a big, as I talked about how internet penetration has gone up 85% compared to how things were in 2017. I think people need to understand that we're expecting IEBC, what the role of IEBC will be in all this. I remember Wafula Chebukati, when they were launching, I think their plan, said that they'll have more servers. And one of them will actually be availed for the media in terms of navigating those results. And if that ends up being the case, it will be great, because now we'll be able to get access to the results that are said that will be official for us to project to the people. So I think for me, the social media propaganda and fake news will actually present a huge challenge come 2022.
And this, Joe, will be what Jamila is talking about is absolutely spot on, because what needs to be fixed is IEBC. This is just one by-election of 96,000 voters. I think more than 50% of who are not voting today. So you have about 50,000 votes to count. It should be found displeasing that this is the pace of...
I mean, I was going to say that. This is what, almost going to...
almost 11.
Yes, it's an embarrassment.
5-6 hours since the polls closed.
Yes, I covered an election in the Gambia, and you know, they were counting marbles. It was faster than this. They didn't, and more efficient.
And there were 1 million people in there.
Yes, and that was a national presidential election.
1 million marbles.
Yes, I think we have a serious problem of efficiency at IEBC. But we were hoping that at some point, remember, in places like the UK and even South Africa these days and the US, when polls close, you can also be able to project how the results are going. These polls closed at 6. And then we were fed with zeros for the first 3 hours. What is that about? How difficult is it to actually count 96,000 votes, assuming 100% turnout? And also considering the very welcome change that the IEBC made some time back, that a polling station will not have more than 700 votes. So you can actually count 700 votes and hit the system with the results. By 7:30, we should have known who is who in Kiambaa.
Yeah, and that is interesting, because I remember when we had the referendum, for example, when you had the IIEC, they began this whole thing of, you know, electronic transmission of results, and they were quite efficient at it. And people started getting used to very fast results. I mean, within a few hours of the election, you actually know what's going on. And this has happened in many, many by-elections, whether it was Kericho, whether it was the different by-elections that we had, even in Nairobi and all that. But it does appear to me that something has slowed down at the IEBC. This is not the pace that even that we've been used to.
And
even in the context of a general election.
Muguga Ward,
even in the context, I know.
You know, a fraction of these polling stations.
29 polling
and even in the
stations.
context of a general election, we've seen faster results in general elections compared to what we are seeing now. Whereas, I mean, one would expect, because this is just a constituency, that all the IEBC resources are actually concentrated in this one constituency and the small ward over there. There should have been something else. And I think this is worrying. I don't know whether it's because there are only 3 commissioners. I don't know. But it's something
they're not the ones counting. They have systems down there that are doing the job.
And a full secretariat at play.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think they ought to take this really seriously, because in 2007, delay in the tallying of votes or in the release of results actually introduced the suspicions to the point of the then ECK chairperson, the late Kivuitu, saying, where are the results? Where are these? Are they being cooked?
Somewhere, yeah.
And they said that. So any delay actually raises suspicions about what else is being done. And maybe, I mean, we can look at the 2017 election, and we know that those delays did contribute a lot to the nullification of the presidential election results.
And as we take that break, the gap is continuing to shrink between the UDA candidate and the Jubilee candidate, now reporting from 71 polling stations out of the 154. The UDA candidate is at 9,223 and the Jubilee candidate...
Just changed now.
Oh, it's just gone up.
It's
okay, there we go.
94-17.
Yeah. See how fast that is moving, but yes, that is, like you said,
very tight.
Francis, that these numbers will continue to change. So
I think this is the night where our viewers ought to be armed with a calculator.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
I think it's 382
now.
382,
yeah, so you see it keeps swinging, back and forth. It was 314.
329.
Now it's 382. So yeah. Okay.
This is a good time for double math students.
It is significant though that in the last like 3 or 4 batches of results, the numbers have been the gap has been tightening.
Suddenly there's a jump now.
Because I mean we started at 900 and now we are at below 400. I think that is interesting, and we need to watch the next couple of batches and see whether that trend is reversed or whether it remains the same. But we need to take a break because we need to talk about a lot more, including those coalitions that die and don't die. Don't go away.